The first tremor arrives mid-litany, a polite knock beneath the floor that does not disturb the candles. Hands pause on workbenches, not from fear, but from ritual. 3 breaths, the prayer ends, the knock ends. On Gethsemar Secundus, tremors are timetable and sacrament, the rhythm by which 40 billion souls lift, pour, and listen. When a titan falls, the earth remembers for 7 days. This hive learned to live inside a metronome. Walkways hang on chains, vats mount on gimbals. Children count the knock between prayers before they learn the saints' names. In the underhive markets, brass discs set flush in paving stones answer each tremor with thin metallic notes, proof the ground beneath has been tuned. Beyond the last habrows, stone spires rise like the ribs of some buried leviathan, their iron-crowned peaks humming gently in frequencies felt more than heard. The workers call them the choir, no one argues with the name. Chief Moderati Vex Korath watches the hive, translated into stress plots in a windowless, manifold chamber 300 meters below street level. Seismic readings crawl across brass-framed cogitators like the vital signs of a sleeping giant. Routine tremors slot neatly into forecasts built from decades of marching engines and industrial rhythm. Today, some do not. He fingers the activation cord of his neural interface and summons 3 days of comparative data. The knock lengthens by fractions, intervals between tremor sets drift beyond predicted variance. It is the kind of change flesh notices before instruments register the deviation. The voxcaster at his elbow hisses atmospheric static, benedictions, then what everyone waits for: God engines on the northern horizon. Legio Tholos Mortis advances along Corridor Primus, standard route, standard cadence. From the lower hive you do not see titans, you feel them as slow thunder transmitted through planetary bedrock. Above, the spire crowns shimmer beneath void shield umbrellas, dome-like mantles that push debris aside and dim the sun to amber twilight. The nobility and senior clergy live beneath these crackling barriers, insulated from the worst of what the world offers. When tremors come, their floors barely register movement. Their candles never flicker. The pilgrim ways remain sealed. Gate arches wide enough for bulk cargo haulers yawn beneath frescoes depicting sainted caravans no one alive recalls. Dust coats evacuation directional arrows, wax hardens on iron hasps. Purity papers hang like shed skin. Citizens use the approach plazas as markets and queuing areas, spaces for the patient commerce of waiting. Everyone knows the ways exist for emergencies. Everyone knows emergencies do not get officially declared. Sacristan Acolyte Thane moves between the resonance pylons at dawn with oil and data slates, lips forming silent calibrations, hands measuring harmonic ratios etched in brass. The pylons hum their constant note, a vibration that runs through the hive's bones and down into planetary crust, teaching stone to flex and distribute load along predetermined paths. This is the stone choir, an ancient network that makes the impossible possible, cities that stand while god engines walk overhead. Red-robed figures tend the system with devotion that borders on prayer, though they do not bless the crowds and the crowds do not ask. In the Arbites precinct, Sergeant Hadrick checks his patrol chronometer and adjusts carapace plating that never quite fits correctly. His route takes him through districts where black market traders sell pylon charms to shift workers, scraps of brass stamped with approximations of Mechanicus sigils. The charms are worthless, but hope maintains stable exchange rates in a world where the next tremor might collapse more than faith. Korath isolates variables, subtracting ore train schedules, foundry bleeds, the predictable chaos of 40 billion people moving through constrained spaces. The irregularity persists, small and wrong, like a missing tooth in familiar equations. He forwards notification to the sacristan cell, minor drift, routine corrections advised. The reply stamps acceptance and assurance that all parameters remain within tolerance. He logs the exchange anyway, dates it, draws a thin line through the duty hour. Beneath the hive, something drums with ceremonial slowness, heavier than hymns, more deliberate than machinery. The Titans walk their prescribed paths, following routes surveyed by the first Mechanicus explorators to claim this world. Every step calculated, every footfall timed to planetary frequency, part of a grand design that keeps hives standing and tremors manageable. We will follow what happens when that design fails, when rhythm becomes injury and certainty turns to rubble. 1 week measured not in days but in intervals, counted by the body, by falls and afterfalls, by prayers you finish and prayers you cannot. The knocks will not stay between prayers, they will become the prayers themselves. The drumming beneath the hive grows stronger, but the records that might explain why fragment like glass under scrutiny. To understand what follows, we set boundaries. 1 world, Gethsemar Secundus. 1 span, 7 standard days from the first fall to final subsidence. 4 institutions whose responses determine outcomes. The Collegia Titanica, represented by Legio Tholos Mortis, the Adeptus Mechanicus Seismologos, who tune the planetary frequency, the governor's chancery that administers 40 billion lives, and the ecclesiarchy whose liturgies define obedience and suffering. We will examine each crisis through a consistent analytical grid. Material process traces how stone moves, how machines step, how food and water travel when ground becomes unreliable. Control mechanisms map the edicts, routings, sirens and locks that institutions deploy when doctrine meets disaster. Survival tax quantifies the price extracted from those who wish to reach the next interval, measured in rations, bribes, and abandoned hope. Spiritual cost counts the catechisms swallowed to make the rest bearable, the prayers that replace screaming. The record is not whole. Cogitator cause fused under stress. Vox spools erase themselves beneath static and fear. Where gaps exist, we mark them. Where possible, we triangulate from manifold logs recovered from Titan command chambers, shrine servo skulls programmed to witness devotional activities, Auspex feeds from orbital monitoring stations, and civilian depositions taken under oath and hunger. From these fragments we will rebuild the hour when a god machine lost its step and the planet learned a new rhythm. At macro scale, Gethsemar Secundus resembles a circuit board etched in continental stone. Tectonic maps show stress lines radiating from hive clusters like fractures around bullet holes. 7 primary population centers anchor the continental masses, connected by transport corridors that follow geological weak points rather than surface convenience. Coastal shelf mining operations extract promethium through deep-bore platforms, their tunnels honeycombing the seabed like termite galleries. The planet bears industrial scars accumulated across millennia, wounds that never quite heal. Infrastructure threads the planetary crust at meso-scale. Promethium mains run parallel to Titan corridors, feeding refineries through pipelines thick as subway tunnels. The pilgrim ways cross this network at right angles, buried evacuation routes built for emergencies and sealed against their use. Above ground, void shield umbrellas protect spire districts like iron flowers under glass domes, deflecting debris but not ground waves. 3 faces emerge from the administrative mass to provide human scale. Sacristan Acolyte Thane tends the stone choir with devotion bordering on obsession, his logs recording harmonic deviations too small for concern, but persistent enough to note. Hab widow Mira Corvast raises 2 children in mid-hive residential blocks, her survival dependent on ration queues and black market supplements, her husband lost to industrial accident 3 years past. Sergeant Hadrick patrols districts where order depends on routine, his authority measured in small gestures and predictable consequences. He is also Vex Korath's cousin, binding manifold chamber to street precinct despite institutional walls. The battlefield context remains deliberately fragmented. Vox intercepts suggest Orc incursion at extreme range, green-skinned scrap hulks massing beyond the outer system. Other sources point to HereTech scrap code interference bleeding through manifold networks, corrupting data streams with algorithmic noise. The Legio advances towards something, but enemy designation shifts between reports. What matters is not the target, but the march itself, god engines following routes carved through continental bedrock. Buried in the governor's chancery files sits Decree E9, Tithe Preservation Protocols, established during the Macarian Crusade and never rescinded. The decree permits extraordinary measures when imperial assets face existential threat, prioritizing strategic, materiel, and sacred engines over civilian evacuation. Most citizens know nothing of E9, those who do speak of it in whispers, understanding that some policies exist precisely because they should never be implemented. The Mechanicus calls their planetary modifications tuning, maintaining frequency tables that specify acceptable cadence windows for god engine columns, refinery bleeds, ore trains, even cathedral bells. Within those windows, the stone choir bleeds energy along safe paths. Outside them, harmonics can stack and amplify. The Chancery's emergency protocols assume the windows hold. The ecclesiarchy argues that panic kills more efficiently than falling stone. Physics promises earthquakes that spend themselves in minutes, tremors fading as shockwaves dissipate through planetary mass. On Gethsemar Secundus, this does not happen. The operational question haunts every subsequent analysis. What made a quake last a week when natural law says it should end before the prayers finish? The answer lies beneath ornament and ash, in a network older than the prayers that sanctify it. When Mechanicus explorators first claimed Gethsemar Secundus during the Great Crusade, they found a world whose geological structure resembled a musical instrument waiting for someone to strike the keys. Continental plates sat in harmonic relationship. Crystalline formations deep in the mantle created natural resonance chambers. Tectonic stress lines formed geometric patterns that suggested providence rather than accident. The explorators chose not to question fortune, they built upon it. Early colonization attempts failed when industrial vibration accumulated in unstable feedback loops, collapsing mine shafts and cracking hive foundations before the first spires reached completion. Seismic energy pooled in subsurface chambers like water, finding its level, creating resonance cascades that shattered stone and faith in equal measure. The solution required turning the planet into an instrument that could be played deliberately rather than allowing it to sing itself to pieces. Construction spanned 3 centuries. Resonance pylons rose at calculated intervals, their crystalline cores attuned to specific frequencies that bled harmonic energy along predetermined paths. Choir nodes buried beneath major population centers collected vibrational stress and channeled it through deep anchors that reached into the planetary mantle like harpoons seeking the world's heart. The network transformed random industrial noise into controlled percussion, excess energy dissipating as heat and silence. The Mechanicus called it the Stone Choir, and doctrine was born. Sacristan Acolyte Thane inherited this knowledge through years of devotional study, his work resembling prayer because precision demands reverence. Each dawn he walks the circuit of resonance points within his assigned sector, chanting mathematical litanies that adjust harmonic relationships by fractions of degrees. He oils hymn plates etched with ratios, checks frequencies against brass abaci, and listens with augmetic sensors until his teeth ache from sympathetic vibration. The catechism remains simple. Energy bleeds like prayer into air, but what is not bled accumulates, and what accumulates seeks release. The doctrine appears straightforward. God engines follow prescribed routes, surveyed to avoid harmonic nodes and structural weak points, their footfalls generating controlled percussion along corridors carved through continental bedrock. Each step represents a deliberate strike upon the planetary drum, timed and positioned to produce harmonics that strengthen rather than weaken underlying structures. Reactor vent cycles offset from refinery bleeds. Smelter pause wait for legions to pass. Even cathedral bells change their peal to avoid sympathetic vibration that might stack into dangerous resonance. Red-robed seismologos tend the system with devotion that borders on worship, maintaining instruments that measure vibration in units too small for unaugmented senses to detect. Among them walks Magos Kani, old enough to remember when the choir needed improvisation during siege conditions, and young engines broke patterns under pressure. He designed the original resonance equations that guide the lattice, calculations that remain foundational to all subsequent modifications, though his name appears less frequently in later documentation. His signature on early white scrolls becomes redacted authorization codes in recent revisions, bureaucracy rounding edges until nothing sharp remains. The system possesses one critical vulnerability buried in theoretical foundations. Harmonics can amplify as well as dampen, transforming protective resonance into destructive feedback under specific conditions. Internal white scrolls, brittle with age and authority seals, translate caution into litany. Avoid catastrophic phase inversion during reactor venting or loss of footing events. Prolonged rhythm at incorrect frequency may induce resonance cascade with continental implications. The warning exists as theoretical precaution, filed alongside calculations for asteroid impact protocols and demon incursion contingencies that no serving sacristan recalls ever implementing. Current custodians operate largely on inherited parameters, following Kani's ancient equations without fully comprehending the underlying theory of his more esoteric calculations. They know the rules but not the spirit of their creation, understanding that Titan roots intersect with Promethean mains and load-bearing strata according to charts that predate current infrastructure by several centuries. When the choir network was designed, many extraction tunnels and pipeline systems did not exist. The overlay creates potential resonance points that original calculations did not account for, harmonic intersections where industrial vibration might stack in unexpected ways. The Mechanicus archives contain theoretical models for what happens when a God engine falls outside prescribed parameters, when reactor bleeding coincides with loss of footing, when careful timing transforms into random violence. Most assume the scenarios remain purely hypothetical. Magos Kani knows better, but his warnings carry less weight than they once did, buried in files that require higher clearance than most sacristans possess. A Titan's step, when the lattice holds, remains a controlled strike upon the planetary gong, measured to resonate safely with bedrock's natural voice. The god walks, the city shivers, and the stone choir carries the shiver into depth until it fades as heat. An uncontrolled strike operates according to different principles entirely. What it says will be heard for 7 days. The loaf on Mira Corvast's tray resembles grey brick, grown from fungal slurry, stamped with ration sigils that authorize subsistence. Water arrives through meter boxes whose dials resist precise adjustment. Clerks charge penalties for overshooting assigned allocations. The floor delivers its customary knock, polite and punctual. Candle racks mounted along factory ceilings hold steady flames, the hive's declaration that parameters remain normal. Children learn to brace with one hand while reciting catechisms of stability. Feet apart, knees soft, count 7 heartbeats before moving. Teachers correct posture through necessity rather than cruelty. Broken bones consume medical rations. Tremors punctuate lessons like liturgical bells. And some days the distinction blurs between devotion and survival drill. The stone choir hums beneath conscious awareness unless it sings wrong notes. Factory floors mount candle racks because flame speaks faster than auspex when ground shifts. The dancing tallow provides visceral confirmation of stability or its absence, ancient technology trusted above cogitator readings when Earth becomes unreliable. Workers glance at flames between tasks, reading tremor intensity in the degree of flicker. Production continues through minor shudders. Only sustained oscillation triggers evacuation protocols. Above the industrial levels, spire crowns glow beneath void shield umbrellas that deflect debris and orbital dust, amber barriers protecting promenades where nobility conduct business, insulated from planetary rhythm. The shields cannot stop ground waves traveling through bedrock, but they preserve the illusion of separation from consequences. Underhivers share cracked plaster and superstitions, black markets selling pylon charms fashioned from brass scraps stamped with approximated Mechanicus sigils. Mira waits in ration queues that move with geological patience, while her youngest counts tremor intervals as entertainment. A vendor offers charm discounts for bulk purchase. She selects one whose icon resembles architectural stability. Behind the dispensary, Pilgrim Way gates remain sealed, their frescoed evacuation routes dark with accumulated soot. She has never witnessed their opening, though administrative doctrine promises access during emergencies. Sergeant Heydrich processes violations with mechanical precision, fining smugglers who redistribute metered water through ammunition containers. The penalties follow codex calculations. Payment occurs without argument because alternatives involve broken teeth and confiscated merchandise. His patrol route threads districts where order depends on predictable consequences, authority measured in small gestures, and consistent enforcement. Acolyte Thane polishes hymn plates etched with harmonic ratios, his augmetic sensors detecting microfractures in resonance crystals that were intact during previous inspections. The deviations register within tolerance parameters, but their frequency increases beyond statistical expectation. He logs observations and requests senior review, filing duplicates through redundant channels, while the pylon's throat carries hairline cracks invisible to unaugmented vision. Hab block foundations rest on rebar salvaged from decommissioned pilgrim trains, structural reinforcement repurposed from infrastructure that once served evacuation routes, now permanently sealed. The recycling represents imperial efficiency in converting obsolete assets to current necessity, though original load calculations did not account for prolonged seismic stress accumulation. The tremor arriving at mid-shift carries different characteristics. It arrives late according to established patterns, persists beyond normal duration, and presses against diaphragms with rising intensity rather than fading percussion. Candle flames tilt without recovering vertical alignment. Mira counts intervals too slowly while tucking purchased charm into her child's palm. Heydrich pauses mid-citation before completing paperwork anyway. Thane hears sourness in pylon harmonics and accelerates his inspection circuit. Beyond hive perimeters, the northern plane vibrates as god engines establish march cadence. Drumroll percussion no human musician would attempt. Dust rises in curtains from prescribed corridors before carapaces breach the horizon. The stone choir absorbs channels and bleeds energy as designed, fulfilling functions longer than living memory can verify. Void umbrellas darken sky to amber twilight, shimmering as micro-debris descends like metallic rain. In the manifold chamber, Vex Korath cycles through filter configurations while studying stress plots that stack energy where calculations predict feathering dispersal. The pattern stutters like musical triplets imposed over duple rhythm, harmonic interference he flags for sacristan attention and chancery notification. The trace deepens beyond precedent as he monitors, wondering what shape wrong notes assume when traveling through planetary stone toward population centers that depend on correct frequencies for structural integrity. The anomaly Vex Korath flagged does not trigger panic, it triggers procedure. Within the governor's chancery, clerks extract red lacquer files containing the city's appetite for risk measured in colors and quotients. Sirens cycle through green advisories and amber cautions, their frequencies calibrated to penetrate industrial noise without inducing stampede. Refugee tiers are reaffirmed through algorithmic precision, spire vaults for ranked administrators and essential artisans, mid-hive assembly halls for the documented masses, under-hive transit arches for everyone else. Food and Medicae allocations adjust automatically. Cold arithmetic, prioritizing utility over individual need. Sergeant Hadrick supervises cordon rehearsals in districts where order depends on predictable authority. His Arbeits squads practice crowd routing around sealed Pilgrim Way plazas, learning where human rivers buckle under pressure and where mounted voxcasters can drown rumor with instruction. Hadrick walks tactical maps with 2 fingers, one tracking his officers and one the crowd, moving them together until neither breaks formation. The drills assume civil disorder, not planetary rebellion. His codex contains no protocols for when ground becomes the enemy. The ecclesiarchy deploys tranquility rehearsed to sound like faith. Confessors circulate fasting slips that reduce ration queues by design, penances masquerading as crowd management, processional hymns route along thoroughfares the Arbeits want cleared. Incense smoke becomes signal to disperse. Placards appear at stairwells reminding citizens that fear constitutes heresy and stillness equals obedience, spiritual discipline transforming potential chaos into ritualized endurance. Acolyte Thane receives test ping authorizations through his cogitator terminal, instructions to cycle the stone choir through diagnostic frequencies while monitoring network response. The pylon's crystalline throat vibrates with deeper resonance as he adjusts calibration settings, microfractures spreading through matrices under stress loads that remain technically within tolerance. He logs phase drift measurements that stack like discordant musical intervals, individual deviations acceptable but cumulative patterns suggesting threshold approach. Magos Caney reviews accumulated data from his private sanctum, brass abacus clicking as he recalculates resonance equations against current readings. The numbers align with theoretical models he hoped never to verify empirically, harmonic interference building toward cascade conditions as God engines approach prescribed routes. His warnings carry diminished weight, buried in bureaucratic channels that prioritize operational continuity over theoretical concerns. Where his signature once authorized white scroll cautions, redacted authorization codes now appear, bureaucracy rounding sharp edges until nothing dangerous remains. The Pilgrim Ways remain sealed according to ancient policy established during the Macarian Crusade, when emergency evacuations created stampedes deadlier than the disasters they fled. 3 keys exist to override the seals, physical artifacts requiring unanimous consent, the governor's signet, the Archmagos's iron-toothed code, the confessor's sanctified lever. Archived vox snaps capture fragments of debate between key holders, conversations conducted through encrypted channels while seismic readings climb beyond comfortable parameters. Decree E9 lurks in chancery files like a loaded weapon, tithe preservation protocols established during wartime and never rescinded. The decree permits extraordinary measures when imperial assets face existential threat, prioritizing tithed material and sacred engines over civilian movement. Transport corridors may be cleared by force, shielded sanctums reassigned, food allotments diverted to crews whose hands turn the war economy. The protocols assume strategic assets must survive, even if the populations supporting them do not, necessity disguised as doctrine. The debate circles through established positions as each institution protects its prerogatives against compromise. The governor argues for measured response, avoiding panic, through careful information management. The Archmagos cites technical data, suggesting current parameters remain within theoretical limits. The confessor emphasizes spiritual preparation over physical evacuation, insisting the faithful must learn fortitude rather than fleeing trials. Opening the ways requires admitting current preparations may prove inadequate, acknowledgement carrying political costs none wish to pay preemptively. God engines advance along corridor primus according to prescribed timing, their reactor signatures bright enough to register on orbital arrays. Each footfall transmits through bedrock with increasing weight, seismographs printing darker traces as Legio Tholos Mortis approaches the hive whose choir hums beneath their path. The debt between God engines and cities runs deeper than obligation, symbiosis disguised as hierarchy, protection purchased through infrastructure that makes protection necessary. The three keys rest in separate hands while their holders debate necessity versus prudence, institutional authority versus human cost. Below their chambers, 40 billion citizens count knocks between prayers and trust that someone else makes hard decisions when ground becomes unreliable. The stone choir continues bleeding energy along predetermined paths, fulfilling function while accumulating discord that theory suggests approaches cascade threshold. Magos Kani's calculations edge toward validation through catastrophic demonstration, but theory remains theory until the planet learns new songs. The debate ends when doctrine begins. Legio Tholos Mortis deploys according to patterns established across millennia of warfare, God engines moving with ceremonial precision that conceals tactical necessity. Warlord Dominion Eternal leads the column, its carapace bearing heraldry older than the hive it approaches. Two reavers flank the battle line, their weapons trained on horizons where smoke pillars suggest enemy movement beyond visual confirmation. A screen of warhounds ranges ahead, lighter engines whose speed compensates for armor in the eternal calculus of war. Within Dominion Eternal's command chamber, Princeps Majoris Thane feels his heartbeat synchronize with reactor rhythm, neural interface translating flesh into mechanical consciousness. The manifold connection floods his awareness with coolant-tinged air, and data streams from engine sensors, human perception expanding to encompass tonnage and trajectory. Around him, Chief Moderati Vex Korath rides the seismic data like a helmsman in slow ice, hands hovering over arrays that translate bedrock into pulse lines. What should arrive as clean duple cadence, the sanctioned step, carries a persistent triplet afterbeat, a ghost tapping the rim of the planetary drum. Sacristans work the engine's ribs as the column establishes march cadence, sealing girder cogitators against dust and vibration, while their prayers mix with mechanical hymns echoing through carapace corridors. Logistic chains bend to accommodate the advance, promethium tankers lumber alongside ammunition lighters and repair skiffs, supply trains stretching across kilometers of contested ground. The engines walk along marked arteries that bind hive to battlefield, transport corridors surveyed to minimize structural stress while maximizing tactical momentum. Every footfall transmits through the stone choir, energy that should bleed along predetermined paths as theory dictates. Acolyte Thane monitors resonance readings from his station, instruments registering each step with growing alarm as amplification replaces dampening in harmonic calculations. The hymn plates chatter with frequencies that suggest stress rather than stability, crystalline throats developing hairline fractures under loads, technically within tolerance but cumulatively approaching cascade threshold. His reports climb administrative channels while the God engines continue their advance, doctrine prioritizing momentum over technical concerns. Scrap code static prickles through manifold connections like electronic tinnitus, meaningless characters ghosting the edges of hololithic overlays. Vex Korath files the sensation as atmospheric interference, dust scrap across receptor crowns, distant jamming from enemy broadcasts, the kind of nuisance a march shrugs off. Princeps Thane orders filters narrowed, bandwidth hardened, the intrusive whisper pushed to periphery where it cannot disturb pace. The enemy remains distant enough to constitute theory rather than immediate threat, smoke pillars on horizons suggesting Orc presence without confirming contact. During routine reactor bleeding, the warlord's void shields flicker like heartbeats caught skipping rhythm. The fluctuation lasts less than a second. Technical notes tag the event as solar disturbance. Vex Korath logs anomalous readings as beat irregularity, technical notation flagging harmonic deviations that stack beyond precedent. The file receives automated acknowledgement but no human review, bureaucracy filtering urgent information through channels designed for routine maintenance reports rather than crisis warnings. God engines move like walking continents, their passage reshaping terrain through weight and vibration. Dust rises in curtains from prescribed corridors, atmospheric pressure shifts as void shields displace air mass. The hive spire crowns shimmer beneath amber barriers that deflect debris, while ground waves travel unimpeded through bedrock, void umbrellas providing illusion rather than protection against forces moving through stone itself. The march continues through refinery complexes whose pipelines thread the landscape like exposed circulatory systems, promethium mains carrying industrial lifeblood through arteries vulnerable to seismic disruption. Pipes lie like veins across the plain, some buried, some armored, most old. Each footfall tests structural integrity designed for static loads rather than dynamic stress, engineering margins eroding under repetitive impact that accumulates rather than disperses. Magos Kaney reviews real-time data from his sanctum while the Legio advances, brass abacus clicking through calculations that confirm his worst theoretical projections. The outputs line up along the wrong side of thresholds he drew in youth because no one had crossed them in his lifetime. He initiates priority channels to the Archmagos, the governor, the confessor. Encrypted ident keys blossom into busy tones and deferrals wrapped in politeness. Resonance cascade sits not as remote possibility but as destination, harmonic interference accumulating beyond network capacity to bleed energy safely. Dominion Eternal maintains unbroken gate across the web of pipelines toward ground that no longer answers as expected. The stone choir accumulates discord instead of bleeding it, planetary instrument preparing to sing songs no human composer intended. Vex Korath's beat irregularity represents rhythm becoming arrhythmia, controlled percussion transforming into chaotic feedback as ancient networks approach cascade threshold through mechanical devotion that mistakes consistency for safety. The God engines advance according to doctrine, while the earth beneath them learns harmonics that will reshape continents. The manifold corruption arrives as a blizzard of meaningless characters flooding Vex Korath's neural interface, scrap code finally overwhelming filters designed for atmospheric interference rather than systematic assault. Each symbol burns like acid through his consciousness, while data streams fragment into electronic noise that tastes of copper and ozone. He widens bandwidth, gaps, tightens security protocols, watches the residue smear across hololithic displays like oil staining glass. The beat irregularity he logged becomes cascading failure as manifold systems stutter under corruption, loads they were never designed to handle. Princeps Majoris Thane feels the God Engine's machine spirit recoil from the intrusive code, neural symbiosis fracturing as contradictory impulses flood command pathways. He forces manual override through connections built for cooperation rather than domination, human will wrestling mechanical instinct while Dominion Eternal's gait falters mid-stride. The sanctioned step should strike clean percussion against surveyed ground. Instead, the left foot seeks purchase on earth that liquefies under concentrated tonnage, soil shearing along stress lines that held for centuries until this moment. Beneath the refinery complex, promethium extraction has honeycombed the subsurface with galleries and chambers, structural voids created by industrial appetite spanning millennia. The God Engine's foot punches through reinforced earth into caverns filled with volatile atmosphere, weight concentrating on supports designed for static loads rather than dynamic impact. Liquefied soil pours into extraction chambers, while the leg sinks past ankle joint, gyroscopes screaming as balance algorithms encounter physics they cannot compensate for. From cathedral spire observation platforms, servo skulls record without interpretation as Dominion Eternal begins its genuflection. The warlord leans like a tower discovering gravity, massive carapace tilting beyond recovery angles, while void shields flicker and fail. Weapons systems discharge randomly as targeting cogitators lose coherent reference frames, plasma bolts scorching air in directions that serve no tactical purpose. The fall develops with geological patience, rotation around failing anchor points measured in fractions that feel eternal. In the choir vault beneath the hive, Acolyte Thane witnesses theoretical catastrophe becoming empirical reality. His hymn plates shriek frequencies that crack stone as phase inversion transforms the stone choir from energy sink to amplifier. Resonance crystals shatter under harmonics they were designed to channel safely, microfractures opening like mouths, screaming frequencies below human hearing. Deep anchors begin singing in notes that propagate through planetary crust, the network flipping from dampening to amplification as parameters cross thresholds buried in Magos Kaney's sealed calculations. Kaney's final transmission reaches priority channels as Cascade achieves critical resonance. Cascade confirmed. Phase inversion achieved. Emperor, preserve us. His voice carries across Vox networks while seismographs print traces exceeding measurement scales, harmonic interference, stacking into feedback loops the planetary network cannot bleed safely. The instrument designed to protect cities prepares to sing songs written in physics rather than devotion. Dominion Eternal impacts with force measured in megatons, reactor containment breaching as adamantium carapace meets liquefied earth. The plasma core bleeds white sun across the refinery complex, while sonic shock propagates through bedrock faster than sound travels through atmosphere. Void shield generators explode in sequence, electromagnetic pulse racing ahead of physical destruction to brown out power grids across continental distances. The wave front moves with purpose rather than random dispersion, following resonance paths carved by the stone choir through geological structures that amplify rather than dampen seismic energy. Cathedral bell minarets crack in perfect unison across two continents, bronze voices silenced as harmonic frequency finds sympathetic vibration in every tuned metal surface the network touches. The planet rings like a struck gong, but the note does not fade. Pilgrim Way gatehouses disappear beneath rolling walls of liquefied earth, frescoed evacuation routes swallowed by ground that moves like viscous fluid, seeking equilibrium. The first ground wave passes with crushing force, but instead of dissipating energy through planetary mass, the wave reflects and amplifies through resonance anchors that transform the world into a percussion instrument playing itself. What should decay according to physical law instead accumulates, harmonic energy stacking through feedback loops that theoretical models predicted but operational doctrine ignored. The quake does not end. It finds rhythm, establishes cadence, grows stronger as each pulse feeds back through the stone choir network. Routine tremors were liturgy. This becomes unholy symphony, the planet learning to count intervals in destruction rather than devotion. The week begins not with single catastrophic event, but with the first beat of a rhythm that will reshape continents. Mira Korvast grabs her children as hab block foundations shear along stress lines that were hairline cracks moments before, the pylon charm in her youngest's palm suddenly cold and meaningless. Sergeant Hadrick opens his codex to procedures that assume solid ground, authority manuals containing no protocols for when Earth becomes fluid enemy. The stone choir sings frequencies that crack stone, and faith in equal measure, planetary network transformed from protective instrument into geological weapon whose song will last 7 days. The first tremor transforms from percussion to liquefaction as streets abandon their architectural certainties and begin behaving like viscous water. Paving stones float on substrate that flows with geological patience, while hab blocks sink unevenly, their foundations shearing along stress lines that held for centuries until the stone choir learned its new song. Industrial conveyors twist like dying serpents as mounting points lose purchase, cargo spilling across thoroughfares that no longer maintain consistent elevation or direction. Void shield umbrellas continue their amber vigil over spire districts, deflecting atmospheric debris, while the earth beneath them fails catastrophically. Foundations designed for static loads crack and separate as harmonic vibration propagates through bedrock, transforming the protective barriers into domes of trapped air and dust suspended over craters that were promenades. From below they resemble lanterns floating on dark water, while everything not under glass goes under entirely. Mira Korvast grips her youngest child while riding a staircase that bucks like a living thing, ferrocrete treads separating from walls that no longer provide structural support. The hab block lists 30 degrees before stabilizing against neighboring structures, creating canyon-like spaces where liquefied stone flows like rivers, carrying furniture and bodies toward depressions gravity selects. The pylon charm pressed into her child's palm grows warm with sympathetic vibration, brass, scrap, resonating with frequencies that make teeth ache and promises nothing. Sergeant Hadrick opens his codex to procedures written for solid ground, authority manuals containing no protocols for streets that behave like liquid-seeking equilibrium. His patrol sector transforms into an archipelago of stable islands connected by debris bridges that shift with each ground wave pulse. He establishes shoot to deter perimeters around supply caches, warning shots echoing across districts where traditional crowd control becomes maritime navigation between floating hab sections. The codex closes without answers. Acolyte Thane descends through maintenance shafts toward choir sublevels, augmetic sensors detecting harmonic frequencies no human throat could produce. The hymn plates sing in keys that exist in theoretical mathematics rather than devotional practice, resonance crystals cracking under loads their designers never anticipated. Manual override stations spin freely, disconnected from networks that operate according to feedback loops rather than human control. The low-frequency hum from pylons permeates everything, a constant vibration that resonates in bones and cannot be silenced. Mechanicus loudhailers instruct citizens to shelter near resonance pylons, claiming proximity will provide protection through energy absorption. Crowds gather around stone spires that hum with subsonic frequencies, the vibration promising stability, while hairline cracks spread through crystalline matrices. Technical doctrine assumes the network can be controlled. Reality demonstrates that cascade conditions transform protective instruments into geological weapons, singing themselves to destruction. Ecclesiarchy confessors declare fasting litanies as crowd control disguised as spiritual discipline, reducing food distribution queues while proclaiming hunger as purification. Arbites maintain cordons with shock mauls and aimed weapons, authority enforced through violence when doctrine provides no guidance for liquid streets. The institutions respond with mechanisms designed for human-scale threats, while the planet itself becomes the enemy. Survival taxes accumulate through scarcity arithmetic. Water rations triple in price as distribution networks fail, pipes shearing along newly liquid stress lines. Black market vendors sell steady stone charms at premium rates, brass scraps and crystalline fragments, promising stability through sympathetic vibration. The charms sell out within hours despite their demonstrated ineffectiveness, hope maintaining exchange rates when physics offers no comfort. Thane discovers the anchorite sanctum during his descent, a circular chamber where specialized psalmist engineers maintained harmonic balance through coordinated mathematical precision. Their chairs remain occupied by figures whose augmetic modifications failed under cascade conditions, neural interfaces overloaded by frequencies beyond human tolerance. The anchorites died at their posts during phase inversion, skeletal forms still strapped to control thrones, their faces frozen in silent agony. Their specialized knowledge dies with them, leaving planetary frequency uncontrolled and cascade continuation guaranteed. The three keyholders convene through encrypted channels while seismic readings exceed measurement parameters, debating Pilgrim Way activation as foundations crumble beneath their separate locations. The governor argues for measured response avoiding panic. The Archmagos cites technical data suggesting cascade will self-limit. The confessor emphasizes spiritual preparation over physical evacuation. The keys remain apart while ground waves strengthen rather than dissipate, institutional prerogatives protected against acknowledgement that current preparations prove catastrophically inadequate. Orbital surveillance tracks the wavefront as it arcs across continental masses like a scythe harvesting stability. Harmonic energy following resonance paths carved by the stone choir toward coastal regions, where promethium extraction has honeycombed the seabed. Each pulse grows stronger as feedback loops amplify rather than dampen seismic energy, the planetary network spreading destruction with mechanical precision. The wave sweeps toward shores where industrial appetite has created subsurface vulnerabilities, where deep-bore platforms and pipeline networks await the planet's new rhythm. What began as single impact becomes rhythmic percussion, the world learning to count intervals in geological violence rather than devotional timing. The scythe has a destination, and the sea waits to meet the land in frequencies that will reshape coastlines and crack the foundations of continents. The scythe reaches water on the third day, ground waves propagating through coastal shelf where centuries of promethium extraction have carved subsurface galleries like termite damage through planetary bone. Undersea extractors built for static loads tear from their moorings as harmonic stress races down drill strings into chambers carved beneath the seabed. Gas erupts from ruptured wellheads in pillars that pierce fog and ignite spontaneously, pressure equalizing in heartbeats. The planet counts for everyone. The sea catches fire in geometric patterns, orange veins spreading along wave crests until water burns and smoke writes new weather across horizons. Pipelines whip like metallic flails across the waterline, their armored sections separating under loads no engineer calculated for moving Earth. Flames ladder through coastal fog in patterns that mirror the resonance network's subsurface architecture, each burst corresponding to extraction points where industrial appetite created vulnerabilities the cascade exploits with mechanical precision. The burning sea illuminates smoke columns rising like funeral pyres for civilization that trusted instruments more than physics. Void shield umbrellas finally surrender to accumulated stress, their generators browning out in sequence as harmonic frequencies overwhelm electromagnetic containment fields. Power grids trip in cascades, capacitor banks exhaust in perfect order, then chaos. Spire crowns shatter like glass bells struck too hard, raining relics and architectural fragments onto alleys where crowds once queued for rations. Stone saints break along hairline faults and tumble into gutters with ash and brass tags, nobility finding themselves sharing liquefied streets with masses they governed from amber-lit isolation. Hospital triage adapts through liturgical efficiency, medici chanting procedures that free attention from choice and push it into rhythm. Compound fractures become routine by administrative decree. Crushed thoraxes and internal hemorrhages claim the category priority until supply is exhausted. Intake cogitators blink error codes because corridors bend and wards swap floors. Orderlies redraw maps with grease pencils between ground waves, while chaplains attach absolution slates to gurney rails so last rites can be delivered by touch when the next pulse makes speech impossible. Sergeant Hadrick's cordon dissolves under surge toward the sealed pilgrim way, thousands pressing against barriers that assume solid foundations rather than liquefied substrate. Warning shots snap and ricochet from shrine statuary, gouging stone scrollwork into syllables no one can read. The crowd flexes around barriers as if it were one animal hunting the low point, mass human movement creating pressure waves more dangerous than individual desperation. His officers keep formation until the ground itself moves them. Batons and voices fail against physics lessons disguised as panic. In choir sublevels, acolyte Thane cannot hear human voices over what he terms counter-hymn, harmonic frequencies that drown speech in subsonic roaring. The network sings itself into cascade amplification, each pulse feeding back through resonance anchors to generate stronger subsequent waves. He attempts manual detune at primary control stations, brass wheels spinning freely while resonant plates vibrate with enough force to pulp unprotected flesh. The realization strikes with theological certainty. Cascade has achieved self-sustaining resonance, feeding on its own rhythm rather than requiring external energy input. Technical files recovered later contain the framework buried in clearance levels most sacristans never achieve. Choir modulation requires anchorite consensus, specialized psalmist engineers whose mathematical precision could theoretically halt cascade progression through coordinated counter-resonance. The notation stamps across documents like epitaph, all stations silent. The anchorites died during phase inversion, their neural interfaces overloaded by frequencies beyond human tolerance, taking specialized knowledge into silence that dooms any hope of stopping planetary percussion. Ecclesiarchy confessors forbid exodus through doctrinal interpretation, declaring evacuation attempts flight from trial rather than prudent survival. Sermons echo across districts where ground moves like water, while spiritual discipline demands endurance rather than escape. The faithful must demonstrate fortitude through suffering rather than seeking relief through movement, theological comfort provided for those who remain, and condemnation for those who flee. Mira Corvast weighs survival arithmetic while holding children against walls that breathe with harmonic vibration. The food dispensary queue stretches across debris bridges that may not exist in 10 minutes. Rumors suggest night household mustering yards offer transport for those who can reach them before departure. She counts intervals between ground wave pulses, calculating whether devotional patience or desperate sprint offers better odds for keeping her children breathing, while the pylon charm in her youngest's palm grows hot with sympathetic resonance. The aerial view, stitched from shrine skulls and failing survey drones, shows continental fissures opening, with geological patience, stress lines propagating along paths the stone choir carved through bedrock during centuries of controlled energy bleeding. The cracks pause like predators reconsidering their bite, harmonic frequencies seeking optimal resonance points in planetary core structure. Then they widen beyond measurement scales as the planet learns to crack itself along lines of harmonic weakness, while institutions debate appropriate responses to catastrophic reality. The cascade feeds on contradiction between doctrine and physics, institutional mechanisms designed for human-scale threats, encountering geological forces operating according to different principles entirely. What began as single impact has become planetary percussion, the world drumming itself toward structural failure, while those with keys to salvation debate whether opening doors constitutes admission of inadequacy. By the fifth day, exhaustion becomes liturgy, bodies counting intervals in hunger, rather than devotional rhythm, while smoke-bruised light filters through atmosphere that never warms. Food distribution points collapse when their foundations liquefy, ration dispensers tumbling into sinkholes that were thoroughfares before the cascade taught geography new lessons. Latrines overflow and fail as waste processing plants sink beneath their own loads. Sanitation systems designed for stable infrastructure encountering fluid geology that redistributes everything according to gravitational preference rather than engineering intention. Plague prayers begin in districts where water runs brown with runoff from liquefied cemetery soil, ecclesiarchy chaplains chanting litanies against disease, while Medicaid distribute purity seals that promise spiritual protection against bacterial reality. Hospital triage adapts through liturgical efficiency, compound fractures reclassified as routine by administrative decree because crushed thoraxes consume the skilled hands they still possess. The faithful queue for blessings that cost nothing, while clean water commands prices measured in family heirlooms. Night households thunder through wreckage with mechanical precision, their ion shields deflecting debris while they extract relic banners and sworn nobility from spire districts that no longer exist above ground level. Armiger squadrons escort cargo lifters loaded with heraldic artifacts and bloodline representatives, leaving the remainder with benedictions calculated to ease conscience rather than preserve life. A knight pauses long enough to issue blessing over 1,000 faces pressed against cordons. Then the visored head turns, Vox grinds out prayer for fortitude, and the engine steps away. The footprints fill with slurry that swallows the noise. Governor's decree arrives through emergency channels still functioning despite infrastructure collapse. Decree E9, activated for the first time since the Macharian Crusade, ended 3 millennia past. The red lever breaks glass that most assumed ceremonial, unfurling, machine-scribed text and stamped seals that redefine survival through bureaucratic precision. Tithed material, sacred engines, and data vaults receive priority classification for transport and shelter. Civilian movement becomes non-essential by administrative definition. Logistics officers breathe easier because at last rule outranks improvisation, cold arithmetic, protecting instruments over the lives that maintain them. The pilgrim ways could swallow half the hive without jamming, broad frescoed tunnels designed for exactly this crisis. They stay sealed. The 3 keys, signet, iron-toothed code, sanctified lever, never meet as institutions protect prerogatives against compromise. Vox snaps capture polite war, not yet, the governor argues. Opening risk stampede, parameters remain within limits, the Archmagos cites. Models show self-limitation. The faithful must anchor, the confessor insists. Flight from trial invites judgment. Each speaks the language of care while guarding jurisdiction, policy protecting institutional authority over human survival. Sergeant Heydrich receives reassignment orders tasking him with data vault protection rather than crowd control, institutional priorities shifting from public order to asset preservation. He watches two Arbites remove their badges with the quiet of men returning borrowed clothes, one handing his shock maul to a refugee before walking toward breaks in cordons. Heydrich does not fire. Most stay, forming walls in front of iron doors while crowds mass at gates that will not open, their authority enforced through violence when doctrine provides no guidance for liquid streets. Acolyte Thane reaches the central anchorite vault through maintenance passages flooded with harmonically charged water, following tags to a chamber designed to withstand siege and truth. The specialized psalmist engineers remain strapped to control thrones arranged around harmonium plates and crystal throats, ascetic seers whose mathematical precision once guided the stone choir through harmonic balance. Their skulljacks stink of burnt ivory, fingers locked in final ratios, faces frozen in expression suggesting they heard the planet learning wrong notes before neural death silenced corrections. The choir sings without human ear to guide it, low as trench wind, steady as heart death, cascade achieving self-sustaining resonance that feeds on planetary structure itself. Mira Korvast reaches Pilgrim Way gates as night columns pass, her children pressed against frescoed barriers that mock emergency doctrine with their accessibility. A squire on running board tosses water canteen with aim that proves practice, charity measured in gestures rather than systematic relief, while sealed tunnels designed for mass evacuation remain locked against their use. The canteen arcs over helms and gauntlets, lands against her child's chest like sacrament, while the charm in small hands hums like trapped insect. The week closes with ground that still shudders in weaker but constant rhythm, tremors that have become planetary heartbeat rather than discrete events. Continental masses have shifted along stress lines carved by centuries of industrial extraction. Maps lie because geography changed while cartographers died. Tallies accumulate in offices that do not tilt. 93% of registries flagged as sacred reach secure storage, while civilian survival records as estimated residuals plotted against water availability and structural charts now obsolete. Physics promises earthquakes should spend themselves in minutes, energy dissipating through planetary mass until silence returns. This one learned to breathe, feeding on its own rhythm through cascade conditions that transformed protective infrastructure into geological weapon. The pivot arrives with recovered documentation explaining why single fall became planetary weak, suppressed calculations revealing dual use, capabilities buried in theoretical frameworks that peacetime administrators never accessed. The sealed archives crack open 7 days after the first fall, clearance codes processed through emergency channels that bypass the bureaucratic machinery now buried beneath liquefied stone. Acolyte Thane stands in Magos Kane's private sanctum, reading documentation that carries the weight of confession rather than technical specification. The stone choir he learns through pages that smell of brass oil and old secrets was never merely a dampener. It was dual-use infrastructure, war economy invention designed to weaponize terrain through controlled harmonic manipulation. The original specifications detail tactical applications lost to institutional memory and deliberate forgetting. During siege conditions, Titan footfalls could be magnified along designated corridors to collapse enemy SAP networks, shake loose ambushes from prepared positions, or harden chosen ground through resonant compression that transformed substrate into armor-hard foundations. The same ratios that bled away industrial vibration could be reversed on command to deliver percussion with surgical cruelty. God engines transformed from mere weapons platforms into geological instruments capable of reshaping battlefield terrain through calculated steps. Implementation required specialized oversight that peacetime operations abandoned for administrative efficiency. Anchorites maintained harmonic balance through mathematical precision, their neural interfaces calculating resonance ratios in real time to prevent cascade conditions that could transform controlled weapon into uncontrolled catastrophe. They were conductors of this vast subterranean orchestra, ensuring the planet sang the Imperium's tune rather than its own. Phase inversion represented the forbidden state where dampening became amplification, protective network transforming into planetary-scale destruction that fed on its own rhythm rather than external energy input. The convergence of factors that created cascade conditions reads like theoretical nightmare translated into empirical reality. Warlord's fall during reactor bleeding created massive energy input at precisely wrong frequency. Scrap code interference disrupted filter systems designed to prevent harmonic corruption. Loss of footing event occurred within resonance network designed to magnify rather than absorb such impacts. Each factor alone might have bruised the lattice, together they inverted it. The God Engine's uncontrolled strike delivered energy into a network tuned to receive, while scrap code noise introduced timing errors at the exact moment human oversight needed clarity. The Anchorites died in the first minute, their neural lattices overloaded when every harmonic line they were trained to hold went bright simultaneously. Consensus failed because there were no living throats left to form it, specialized knowledge dying with those whose mathematical precision could have halted cascade progression through coordinated counter-resonance. Without them, manual detune became theater. Wheels that spun freely, plates that screamed, hands reduced to paste for nothing. The choir achieved self-sustaining resonance, energy input equaling energy output plus structural flexure, drawn from subsurface voids collapsing in sequence. After inversion, the network stopped behaving like drain and became reservoir, storing and re-releasing energy along corridors built to move it safely. The feedback followed design parameters vaulting from anchor to anchor, while searching for optimal frequency across planetary bones. The low-frequency hum that permeated everything represented network hunting, stable note, harmonic search pattern that tested geological weak points until cascade locked into planetary rhythm. Each pulse strengthened subsequent waves rather than dissipating energy, the instrument playing itself with mechanical precision. The earthquake lasted a week because the Imperium had transformed Gethsemar Secundus into tuning fork, then buried operational knowledge beneath administrative layers that prioritized routine over comprehension. Institutional memory preserved procedures without understanding theoretical foundations, safety protocols reduced to liturgical repetition rather than adaptive response to changing conditions. The danger was not hidden through conspiracy but through bureaucratic entropy, critical knowledge eroding through generations of clerks who copied forms without reading content. Caney's warnings, signed by his hand in early documentation, became redacted authorization codes in later revisions, bureaucracy rounding sharp edges until nothing dangerous remained. Decree E9's arithmetic fits the revelation with cold precision. Protect instruments, populations can be replaced, but specialized infrastructure requires centuries to rebuild. The choir network represented investment measured in millennia and resources, strategic asset whose loss would cripple imperial war capacity across the sector. Better to sacrifice 40 billion lives than lose dual-use capability that could weaponize terrain on future battlefields where conventional weapons might prove insufficient. The system, in its cold logic, protected itself, its potential, and its secrets, while civilian survival became non-essential by administrative definition. Thane discovers Caney's final personal note sealed within private archives, handwritten text that bypassed official channels through deliberate isolation from bureaucratic oversight. The message carries weight of indictment rather than technical report, precise handwriting forming words that cut deeper than any equation. Told them. They chose silence. Emperor, forgive what we have built. The notation includes calculations showing cascade probability, increasing with each operational cycle, warnings submitted through proper channels and buried beneath classifications that remove dangerous knowledge from operational awareness. The revelation reframes every institutional response through lens of calculated sacrifice. The governor's measured caution protected political authority, while populations liquefied. The Archmagos's technical data concealed dual-use capabilities behind theoretical limits. The confessor's spiritual discipline transformed systematic abandonment into theological necessity. The three keys remained apart because opening pilgrim ways would acknowledge that protective infrastructure had become planetary weapon, admission carrying costs that institutional survival could not bear. The hidden network reveals itself through retrospective analysis as weapons disguised as infrastructure, safety systems designed to fail catastrophically when activated beyond parameters that operational doctrine never acknowledged. The Imperium built its own destruction into planetary foundations, then forgot the safety litanies or chose institutional silence over acknowledgement of acceptable risk. What began as strategic asset became geological catastrophe through the convergence of buried knowledge, bureaucratic entropy, and the cold arithmetic that measures lives against instruments and finds lives wanting. The auditors arrive with brass abaci and portable sanctums, their transport settling on ground that still shivers with harmonic aftershocks measured in fractions too small for flesh to detect, but large enough to register on instruments designed for precision rather than comfort. The counting does not stop when the cascade ends. It migrates from seismographs to ledgers, catastrophe reduced to arithmetic that fits within administrative frameworks designed for managing deficiency rather than acknowledging systematic failure. Gethsemar Secundus receives reclassification from productive to crippled productive, bureaucratic mercy that preserves planetary status while acknowledging reduced capacity. The designation carries its own cruelty. Surviving hive populations must pay increased per capita tithes to redeem planetary deficiency, survivors taxed for breathing while rebuilding on foundations that may liquefy again when the next god engine learns wrong rhythms. Administratum clerks calculate obligations against infrastructure that no longer exists, cross-referencing population estimates with production capacity to determine fiscal impact measured in decades of accelerated labor quotas. The institutional response follows predictable patterns that protect authority through blame distribution. Collegia Titanica files martyrdom documentation for dominion eternal, posthumous honors, transforming mechanical failure into heroic sacrifice, while Legio Tholos Mortis vows memorial campaign elsewhere, on battlefields where enemy positions require reshaping through controlled geological violence rather than accidental cascade. The warlord's crew receives ceremonial interment in archives rather than soil cause of death listed as enemy action rather than infrastructure failure because admitting design flaws invites dangerous questions about other worlds where similar networks hum beneath Titan corridors. Mechanicus investigation concludes with findings that preserve institutional doctrine over technical accuracy. Scrapcode interference receives primary blame, enemy action corrupting systems designed for purity rather than resistance to algorithmic assault. Human error claims secondary responsibility, operators failing to follow procedures during crisis conditions that exceeded training parameters while dual-use capabilities remain buried in theoretical frameworks classified beyond operational clearance levels. The ecclesiarchy attributes catastrophe to spiritual failure among the laity, cowardice manifesting as insufficient faith during trial by earthquake, sermons emphasizing fortitude over evacuation, while pilgrim ways stay sealed by policy rather than emergency. Arbeits after-action reports blame rumor and panic rather than systemic failure, crowd dynamics creating disorder that exceeded law enforcement capacity, designed for human-scale threats rather than planetary rebellion. The Codex receives addenda for liquid streets and floating hab blocks, procedures written by survivors for scenarios they hope never to repeat, while avoiding acknowledgement that ground itself can become enemy, requiring different tactical approaches entirely. Inquisition operatives conduct quiet interviews with survivors, taking depositions under oath and neural probe while maintaining operational security that protects sector stability over truth. They catalogue dual-use network capabilities, map theoretical applications for weaponizing terrain, and reconstruct bureaucratic entropy that turned Magos Kaney's warnings into redacted authorization codes. Their investigation concludes with recommendation for continued silence, sector stability outweighing acknowledgement that Imperial infrastructure contains systematic vulnerabilities designed during wartime and forgotten during peace. The archive seals with classification requiring clearance levels most Inquisitors never achieve, knowledge becoming burden rather than operational warning. Decree E9's arithmetic provides cold validation for institutional priorities. 91% of data vault cores and 93% of catalogued sancta reached secure storage, while estimated civilian survival remains asterisk tied to water tables and map corrections now obsolete. Internal analysis values one pallet of sanctified circuit boards at 600 denied births, ratio that offends the living, while comforting ledgers designed to measure strategic assets against expendable populations. The planet will pay interest on that arithmetic through labor tithes and memorial plaques that commemorate sacrifice without acknowledging systematic abandonment. Survivors receive designation as seismo-exiles, populations displaced by geological rather than political violence, their movement between worlds regulated through labor contracts that transform survival into servitude. They carry ritual learned through necessity, counting knock between prayers, timing intervals to predict ground stability before trusting weight to earth that may betray them again. The practice spreads through exile communities like infection, children learning to brace with one hand while reciting catechisms, memory preserved through gesture when official records classify catastrophe as isolated incident requiring no policy modification. Mira Corvast barters her Pilgrim Way token for passage off-world, brass disc stamped with evacuation sigils that never opened, proving valuable to collectors who appreciate historical irony more than human cost. Transport Manifest lists her family as skilled labor, designation guaranteeing work assignments rather than refugee camps on destination worlds where seismo-exiles build infrastructure that may contain similar vulnerabilities hidden in theoretical frameworks. Her youngest still carries the pylon charm, brass scrap that hums with sympathetic vibration when ground moves wrong, ritual small enough to fit in child's hand, yet heavy enough to carry continent's memory. Sergeant Heydrich receives reassignment to port duty, watching non-essential personnel march past loading ramps, while essential material receives priority handling through protocols that remain active pending sector review that will never come. His new codex contains procedures for crowd control during geological emergencies, authority redefined through lessons written in blood and bureaucracy by survivors who learned that law means nothing when Earth becomes fluid. He counts faces rather than violations, arithmetic of survival rather than enforcement, while remembering names that became blank spaces in ledgers that dislike emptiness. Acolyte Thane undergoes induction as replacement anchorite, specialized training to maintain harmonic balance on worlds where stone choir networks hum beneath population centers, unaware of dual-use capabilities buried in their foundations. The curriculum includes Magos Caney's sealed calculations preserved as technical reference rather than operational caution, mathematical precision required to prevent cascade conditions while knowing that other conductors died at their posts when planetary music turned wrong. He learns to guide harmonic networks safely until doctrine conflicts with physics and institutional silence trumps survival again. The Imperium preserves memory through ritual rather than reform, institutional mechanisms designed to maintain procedure while avoiding acknowledgement that systematic vulnerabilities require systematic solutions. What began as single impact became planetary weak because the machine builds its own destruction into foundations, then chooses bureaucratic silence over dangerous truth. The counting learned in liquefied hives travels with exiles who teach their children where to stand when floor decides to move. Memory carried in gestures too small for institutions to classify as threat, yet persistent enough to remember what official doctrine forgets. The next world with resonance pylons hums safely until it does not. Networks maintained by operators who follow procedures without understanding theoretical foundations that could save or damn billions through fractions measured in degrees rather than lives. The tent city spreads across the neighboring moon's regolith like a second hive reduced to canvas and desperation. Prefabricated shelters arranged in administrative grids that suggest order while housing the chaos of 40,000 families who learned that ground cannot be trusted. Here, the substrate never moves, locked in gravitational certainty, yet bodies remember different lessons. Mira's youngest sits beside a drum of reclaimed water and counts 7 silent seconds between shivers felt by memory rather than stone, phantom tremors traveling through bones that internalized the rhythm of a world that broke itself singing. The creed writes itself through necessity, survival doctrine learned at cost, measured in continence rather than theory. Count first, the knock between prayers, the seconds between shivers, the heartbeats between impacts that reshape geography. Learn the rhythm of ruin because it becomes the only predictable constant when Earth moves like water-seeking equilibrium. Brace with one hand while the other works, feet apart and knees soft, weight distributed across joints that bend rather than break under loads no architect calculated for moving foundations. Choose walls that breathe over walls that stand rigid. Flexible architecture survives stress that shatters stone monuments to permanence. Ferrocrete that gives a little will not betray you all at once. Never trust closed doors secured with 3 locks. Evacuation routes sealed by policy remain sealed when doctrine conflicts with survival, keys held in separate hands while populations liquefy beneath beautiful administrative procedures. Do not stand beneath humming pylons regardless of technical doctrine, promising energy absorption and protective resonance. The song of stability becomes shriek of cascade when networks flip from dampening to amplification. If a god falls, move perpendicular to its gate rather than parallel or opposite. Wave fronts propagate along corridors carved for their passage, while perpendicular ground offers marginally better odds for remaining solid during the geological percussion that follows mechanical death. Save water before icons. Clean fluid proves more valuable than blessed metal when infrastructure fails and purification becomes mechanical necessity rather than spiritual comfort. These rules carry no triumph, only arithmetic of endurance measured in intervals counted between impacts. The brass disc rests in small fingers like sacrament, empty space where pylon charm once hummed with sympathetic vibration from networks designed to protect rather than destroy. Acolyte Thane's final gift before his induction as replacement anchorite, the charm represents memory of faith in instruments that betrayed their purpose when doctrine met physics and institutional silence chose preservation of authority over acknowledgement of systematic failure. The metal grows warm against skin not through harmonic resonance but through human heat, brass scrap carrying the weight of a continent's memory in form small enough for a child's hand, yet heavy enough to remember what official records classify as isolated incident requiring no policy modification. A single candle burns steady in the tent's corner, flame vertical and untroubled because the quake ended 7 days ago when cascade conditions exhausted themselves through structural collapse rather than harmonic resolution. The tremor lives inside people now, internal percussion felt in bones that learn to count intervals in destruction rather than devotion. Children wake from dreams of liquid streets and floating hab blocks. Adults flinch when transport engines pass overhead, with rhythm resembling God machine gait. Families gather around flames that do not dance because ground stays solid under artificial gravity that promises stability through engineering rather than faith in planetary instruments. Under the Imperium's beautiful machines and sacred liturgies sits bureaucracy that treats ground and lives as instruments in calculations measuring strategic assets against expendable populations. Cold arithmetic values data vault cores over civilian survival because infrastructure can be rebuilt while specialized knowledge requires centuries to accumulate. The system builds its own destruction into planetary foundations through dual-use networks disguised as protective systems, then chooses administrative silence over dangerous acknowledgement that systematic vulnerabilities require systematic solutions rather than bureaucratic entropy that rounds sharp warnings into harmless procedure. Worse always comes carried in requisition forms and technical specifications that hide weapons behind infrastructure, cascade conditions buried in theoretical frameworks that peacetime administrators never access, while operational doctrine prioritizes routine over comprehension. This week, when Gethsemar Secundus learned to count intervals in geological violence, represents noise loud enough to remember, but memory travels through ritual rather than reform. Exile communities scattered across neighboring systems teach children to brace with one hand while reciting catechisms of stability, phantom tremors preserved in muscle memory when official doctrine refuses acknowledgement. The hum you think you hear is not there, except on worlds where new anchorites learn to guide stone choir networks through mathematical precision and prayer that they never face the choice between doctrine and survival. They tend resonance pylons with devotion bordering on worship, while knowing specialized knowledge dies with those who possess it, cascade conditions lurking in sealed archives until the next convergence of reactor bleed, scrap code interference and loss of footing events teaches planets new songs no human composer intended. The Earth remembers for 7 days, but people remember longer, counting silent seconds between shivers that may never come.